Hey guys, welcome back to Analyzing Horror. My name is Lauren, and today we'll be talking about my favorite horror movie from 2021, Last Night in Soho. So Eloise, or Ellie for short, is a young aspiring fashion designer who's also deeply enamored with the music and fashion of the swinging 60s. After moving into her new flat in London, Ellie is mysteriously able to enter the 60s through her dreams, where she meets the dazzling wannabe singer, Sandy. However, the glitz and glam of the young woman's life is not all that it appears to be, and these dreams of the past begin to splinter and crack into something darker. So this was easily my most anticipated movie of 2021. I absolutely adore Anya Taylor-Joy, and you might know from my previous videos that I also really love Edgar Wright as a director. So outside of the Cornetto series, this is easily my favorite movie of his. I just think it's absolutely gorgeous in every single way. Not only do I love how layered the story is and the way it's structured, it's also really well paced, but I also loved the performances and all of the characters themselves. I thought that there was some beautiful neon colors throughout this movie. Also, the cinematography and camera movements were so gorgeous. And also the set designs were really amazing, as well as the soundtrack. There's just so much to love about this movie, and I personally think it's a modern masterpiece. I can't fault it for anything. I think it's absolutely perfect. So fair warning, I'm going to be talking about the storyline and some spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, make sure to pause, go watch the movie, and come back afterwards. Alright, so let's get into my thoughts on Last Night in Soho. I like to start off by talking about performances and some of my favorite characters. First off, as I mentioned earlier, I absolutely adored Anya Taylor-Joy as Sandy. I thought she was incredible as this character. I'm just such a big fan of hers. Not only is she breathtakingly gorgeous, but she's incredibly talented. Everything I've seen her in, I've been blown away by her performances. And this is no exception. I felt like she was so effortless in this role. And in addition, there's so many layers to Sandy as a character. And I just thought Anya did such a great job portraying all of that. And she was captivating every time that she was on screen. And I loved her so much in this movie. I also loved Thomasin McKenzie as Ellie. I just thought she did such a great job as our lead character. Not only did she portray Ellie as sweet and you're rooting for her the entire time, you want her to persevere, you want her to succeed. But in addition, I was so impressed with Thomasin simply because she's in every single shot of this movie, so she carries this movie on her back. I also thought it was really cool that I was first introduced to Thomasin through M. Night Shyamalan's movie Old that came out a couple of months before Last Night in Soho. I just thought it was really funny because I'm watching the movie and I'm just like, oh, it's that girl from Old. And I just thought it was funny that she was in two 2021 movies. I also really loved Matt as Jack. I thought he portrayed that character very well. Jack as a character is so charming and smooth, but at the same time, there's a darkness about him that makes you just really not trust him. And I just thought he conveyed that really well through body language and dialogue. And like so many others, I know him from Doctor Who, so it's really cool getting to see him play kind of a darker character. I also love Diana Rigg as Mrs. Collins. I absolutely love what the storyline did with her character. She gave it an incredible performance, and it's almost like a swan song to her career, because unfortunately she passed after filming this movie. And while I'm so sad of her passing, I think it's wonderful that she got to play a really interesting character as her last performance. And after knowing her from her character of Game of Thrones as well as this one, I just think she's a complete badass. Okay, let's move on to the storyline and some of my favorite scenes. So first off, I absolutely loved that opening scene of Ellie dancing around in that newspaper dress that she designed. I just loved how joyous and carefree she was during that scene. And I also really love how the movie establishes her character with such little dialogue. She's just dancing around her room, talking to herself occasionally. And you can just tell by not only the song choice, but by the design of her dress that she's enamored with the 60s, as well as just being a fashion designer as a whole. And I just really love when a movie chooses to show instead of tell. And I just thought that was really cool how you're able to immediately understand this character with such little dialogue. I also really love in the opening scene, Ellie sees her mom in the mirror and she's passed away for a long time. So it's established that she can see ghosts. I just really love that they did that right away. So you already understand that Ellie is different in that case. It just makes her a really interesting character right off the bat. So after this dancing sequence, she discovers that she's been accepted to the College of Fashion over in Soho, London. Eager to start her new adventure, she quickly packs and heads off to the big city. However, the fellow university students aren't nearly as kind as she had hoped they would be. They're all super competitive, and her roommate immediately starts sending passive-aggressive comments her way. Not only do I feel for Ellie during this section of the movie, because I can understand what it feels like to feel left out and not feel understood, and not accepted. But also later that night, her roommate throws a party and she can't even have a peaceful night of sleep because her roommate decides to get busy with a guy in the bed right next to her. So she's forced to go out into the party covered in her comforters, trying to find a place to snuggle up and go to sleep. Like, that's such a nightmarish situation for me. Not being able to have any sense of privacy in your own home, that's such an uncomfortable concept for me. It's probably one of the reasons why I found the movie Mother so unsettling. Like, I can't stand that concept. So between the lack of privacy and the bullying, Ellie decides to move out and find a flat of her own off campus. Here we meet Mrs. Collins, who has a room for rent in her building on the second floor. So Ellie accepts it, quickly moves out of her dorm room, and then settles in. And that first night when she falls asleep is when we get our first dream sequence. And I think this is my favorite dream sequence of the whole movie. I just think it's really beautiful, and I also really love the way that the movie conveys that you're about to go into the dream world. Like, for example, I watched an interview with Edgar Wright where he talks about how there is a sign outside of Ellie's window that is for a French bistro. So it's flashing blue, white, and red, which are the French flag colors. And he shared how he wanted to use the color red to convey the dream world. So as Ellie is walking around the bedroom, you're getting flashes of blue, white, and red, blue, white, and red. But as she's in bed about to go to sleep, you just see flashes of red repeatedly, indicating that you're about to go into the dream world. There's also this really gorgeous shot where the camera is underneath the sheets with Ellie, and she throws them over the camera as the camera pans away from her. And that was just really beautiful and well done as well. And then again, the way we were introduced to the dream world, there's this really dark hallway that Ellie walks down. And at the end of the hallway, we're in 60s Soho, London. It was so vibrant and bustling, and it just looked absolutely incredible. So as Ellie makes her way to the Cafe Del Paris Club, she walks down a flight of stairs, and next to her is a giant mirror where we get to see Sandy for the first time. And I really loved this scene, not only because it's the first time that we get to see Sandy, but the way Ellie and Sandy mirror each other within the mirror is so cool. I actually looked up how they did that after the fact, and they had been practicing for such a long time to get their movements just right. And I just thought that was incredibly impressive. I also thought it was really cool how they were able to get that shot with the coat check attendant, was that they had cast the Weasley twins from Harry Potter, James and Oliver Phelps. So when you're seeing both Sandy and Ellie's coat being taken, both of the twins are on either side taking the coats. So not only was Anya and Thomason mirroring each other, but so was James and Oliver. And I just thought that was so cool. And then we get that incredible dance sequence between Sandy and Jack. And oh my god, is this my favorite scene in the entire movie. Not only do I think that the dance choreography was so well done, but I absolutely loved the cinematography and camera movements in this scene. So it's a long, uninterrupted tracking shot circling these characters as they dance. And not only that, but Sandy and Ellie interchange throughout the dance sequence. And the movie pulls it off flawlessly. Like, I just thought that it was incredible and just absolute cinema magic. And again, looking up the behind the scenes facts about this scene is so incredible. Like, there are YouTube videos where you can watch like Anya or Thomason like duck underneath the camera and like hunch run around so that they can get to their spot and so that they can continue the dance scene. And I just thought that was so, so cool. And I just thought that scene was incredible, not just because of the performances and the way that the actors were able to dance around each other, but everything that went on behind the camera. This movie is so, so amazing for the attention to detail and just like trying to get that shot just right. And they did an incredible job. I also thought it was so cute how Ellie wanted to be just like Sandy. Like, she dyed her hair and she started wearing more 60s style clothes. Like, Sandy sparked confidence and inspiration within Ellie, and I just really love that because she's usually such a shy character. So it was so nice getting to see her have a confident moment. So in the second dream sequence, Sandy is excited to hear that Jack has landed her a job. She thinks it's a singing gig, but unfortunately when we enter the dream world once again, we learn that it's not a singing gig, but in fact an erotic dancing position. Ellie is heartbroken to see this. Ellie can't watch Sandy dance for much longer, so she leaves through a door, which then leads her to Sandy's private room. She's smoking and crying in front of a mirror, looking at her portfolio picture, and you can just tell by the look on her face that she's already feeling like her dream is slipping away from her. And then Jack knocks on the door, and her face contorts into fear and sadness. Jack then informs her that he wants her to spend the night with a male comrade of his, and when she says no, He tells her, everyone else is doing it, what's so special about you? And so she rips away from him and runs down this hallway backstage. And this is where we get a glimpse of what the other dancers' lives are like. It's a horrible combination of selling themselves and drug addiction, and it just offers a gaze into the horrible world that Sandy is now living. So this dream sequence continues. At one point, Ellie finds herself back on her bed, but Jack barges through the door and pulls her into the dream sequence once again. And then Ellie turns into Sandy, and Sandy is forced to dance to attract future clients. And this is a heartbreaking but beautiful scene. I really love how in between the dancing segments, we get scenes of Sandy with a different man each time in a booth. They pour her a drink, pass it over to her, ask her her name, and she gives a different name every time. And every time the man says, that's a lovely name. And each time she gets back up to dance, her dancing becomes more chaotic and the visuals are starting to swirl around her. And to me, that just conveys that her world is unraveling and she's starting to lose who she is as a person. There's also a moment where one gentleman in the booth actually asks her, no, what's your real name? She tells him that she thinks he's a copper. And he's like, oh, do you now? But he moves past that to try to tell her that you're too good for this, Sandy. You better get out while you can. And he wants her to look in the mirror and she says, what if I don't want to? And this is a really powerful scene because Ellie's on the other side of the mirror. So she's looking at Sandy like, look at me, Sandy, look at me. And when she won't look at her, she starts pounding on the glass like, look at me, Sandy, look at me, look at me. And then she just breaks the glass and cuddles Sandy, and that's when the dream sequence ends. Like I said, I thought that scene was really powerful, and I also just thought the visuals were really well done. And again, the colors are just so beautiful in this movie throughout, and that scene was no exception. However, now that Ellie has been exposed to Sandy's new life, this has taken a very significant toll on her mental health. She begins to start experiencing living nightmares where visions of Sandy's life begin to haunt her during the day. She's constantly getting visions of Sandy and of Jack yelling at her, you think you can just walk away? She also begins to be terrorized by these ghostly, faceless men that she assumes to be Sandy's clients. That whole section of the movie is very impactful for me. Like, not only are you just absolutely heartbroken for Sandy, like the poor woman has been put in this situation and she can't leave now. And I can't even imagine being trapped like that. But you also feel for Ellie because she got so much inspiration from Sandy, and now her heart is broken as well for Sandy. And I just feel for both of these women so much in this section of the movie, and I just feel so bad for them. Despite all this though, Ellie accepts an invitation to a Halloween party at a club one night. It just looked like such a fun time, and it was so nice seeing Ellie cut loose for a second. I also really loved getting to see Ellie dance. Like, we've seen Sandy dance several times at this point, but we've never seen Ellie dance. So that was really nice to see. I really enjoyed that. However, the club lighting suddenly turns red, and Ellie is once again plagued by visions of Sandy and the faceless men. The past and present are starting to merge for Ellie. She lets John know that she wants to go for air, and then they end up going to her flat together. What starts off as a sweet and tender moment between the characters on her bed quickly turns into a nightmare when Ellie looks up on the ceiling and there is a mirror-like vision of Sandy being pinned down with a knife by Jack. Terrified, Ellie topples off the bed, and this vision then moves down to the actual bed. And then Ellie stares on in horror as Jack repeatedly stabs Sandy. At this point, Ellie is completely traumatized, and she continues to be plagued by nightmarish visions of a now blood-soaked Sandy, as well as the many faceless men. Desperate to do something and help Sandy in any way she can, she goes to the police and tries to report her murder. However, the police don't take her seriously, not only because they don't believe her, but she doesn't have enough information for them to go on. So Sandy goes to her university library and tries to look up missing persons in the 60s to see if she can find Sandy. When that doesn't work, she begins to suspect this older gentleman that has been giving her attention ever since she dyed her hair similar to Sandy. He had approached her several times over the course of the movie, asking her if he knew her. So Ellie is convinced that this is Jack in present time, so she goes to confront him. However, the older gentleman just completely brushes her off and informs her that Sandy wasn't as innocent as she'd like to believe. However, Ellie doesn't believe him, so she follows him, continuing to tell him that she knows what he did. And amongst this verbal scuffle, the older man unfortunately gets hit by a car. And it's at this point that we get our first big twist. That wasn't Jack at all, but in fact a former police officer named Lindsay, who was an investigator in the red lights district in Soho. He was actually the gentleman that told Sandy that she was too good for this and she should get out while she could. So now, not only does Ellie not know who the murderer is, but she accidentally got an innocent man killed. At this point, Ellie thinks she's just completely lost her mind, so she decides to give up on London and return to her grandmother in Cornwall. So that night, Ellie goes to her landlady, Mrs. Collins, to inform her that she's leaving and to beg for her deposit back. However, Mrs. Collins brushes her off and tells her to sit down and have a cup of tea with her. It's at this point that Mrs. Collins informs Ellie that she knows that she went to the police about a murder upstairs. She then goes on to say that, yeah, you could say Sandy died in that room. She died 100 times in that room. And then we get the big reveal and twist. Mrs. Collins is Sandy. She's been alive this entire time. Not just that, but she killed Jack in self-defense and afterwards went on a murderous rampage on all of her male clients. This scene was really powerful. I loved how the movie gave us several scenes of Sandy killing all of the men in her room and then hiding them in the floorboards and then the walls in her building. I also really loved this line as she was talking about the men. I wasn't going to be used anymore. They sent me to hell, so I sent them to theirs. I have so many emotions for Sandy during this scene. Like, I'm terrified of her. I feel so heartbroken for her. And I'm also kind of proud of her in a weird way. Like, I obviously would never condone murder, but at the same time, she was forced into this horrible life and she finally found a way to get out of it, however violent. And while what she did was horrible, I understand why she did what she did. However, my emotions for Sandy continue to get more complicated as Ellie just stares in horror but is also fighting back tears because she understands what Sandy went through. And she tells Sandy as such, and she promises that she would never tell anyone. And that's when Sandy goes, "No, I know you won't tell anyone." And even more horror settles on Ellie's face as she looks down at her tea and realizes that Sandy has poisoned her. Ellie tries to get up and make an escape, but Sandy slaps her across the face. In this scuffle, Ellie accidentally knocks over an ashtray with a cigarette in it, setting a fire. At this point, John knocks on the door and distracts Sandy long enough where Ellie can get into the hallway. Sandy stabs John and Ellie tries to intervene, but Sandy swipes at her with her knife, knocking her backwards. So now Ellie is slowly trying to crawl backwards on the stairs as Sandy from the 60s is brandishing a knife and slowly advancing on her. I think this is my favorite shot in the entire movie because it's just such a beautiful, euphoric, and vivid scene. Like, in this euphoric state, the stairs have turned into glass, and also Sandy is singing the song "You're My World" by Cilla Black. I love this scene because it's both visually stunning and horrifying at the same time. By the way, the movie does that a lot throughout the storyline, and I just really love that juxtaposition. So Ellie makes it to the top of the stairs and she's able to get a good kick into Sandy's knee, knocking her down the flight of stairs. There's also this really great shot of Anya Taylor-Joy as Sandy yelling, "I'll get you!" So Ellie makes it into the bedroom and locks the door and then runs across the room to the landline to try to call 911. But as she makes it across the room, Sandy's ghostly victims start crashing through the floorboards and the walls. They furiously grab at her as Ellie screams, and it's just a really cool scene to me, mostly because we know now that the bodies of Sandy's victims are in the floorboards and walls of this building. So the ghosts were really creepy, but at the same time, just knowing that the bodies were actually there is also incredibly creepy. At this point, Sandy is able to open the door and she actually gets to see the ghosts alongside Ellie. In addition to all these ghostly men, Jack appears and he points at her and goes, "You're the one who wanted this more than anything you said." And then Ghost Jack slaps Sandy across the face. This softened Sandy to Ellie a little bit and she confessed she didn't want any of this. To which Ellie replied, "I know, I saw." She continues by saying, "They deserved it." And Ellie goes, "I know." At this point, the building is completely engulfed in flames, and you can hear police sirens in the distance. Sandy comments that she's not going to prison. She's been in a prison all her life, and so she decides to stay amongst the flames. Ellie begs her to live, please live. But Sandy tells her, "You can't save me, but you can save yourself." So Sandy pushes Ellie out of the doorway, and reluctantly and heartbroken, Ellie leaves Sandy amongst the flames. And I just really love those last couple of moments between Sandy and Ellie. Like, my heart breaks for them, but I just thought it was so sweet. Not only how much Ellie cared for Sandy, but clearly how Sandy cared for Ellie in some way. And then we get the last scene of the film, where Ellie is a successful fashion designer student. She created 3 dresses and it was a huge success at this event. And after the event, her grandma and John greet her backstage and they're so proud of her. And then Ellie has a moment where she sees her mom in the mirror and she's just beaming and she's clearly so proud of Ellie, and that was just so sweet. And then just as Ellie is about to leave with her grandma and John to go celebrate, she turns back around to the mirror once again and she sees Sandy. And Sandy's smiling and she winks at her and blows her a kiss. And then Ellie walks up to the mirror and they do the little tap that they did at the very beginning of the movie together. I just thought this was the perfect way to conclude this movie. I love that we got a happy ending with Ellie, and in a way Sandy got her happy ending as well, and it was just wrapped up so well, and I just thought it was so great. I lastly wanted to touch on a couple more aspects about this movie that I really loved. First off, I just wanted to elaborate on what I meant about a bittersweet ending for Sandy. Like, throughout the story, I got invested with her character, so I of course cared for her deeply. So the thought of her staying amongst the flames and no longer being around hurt me so much. But at the same time, putting myself in Sandy's shoes, I feel like she's finally at peace, and that's what's most important. And I just love the way that the movie was able to balance those feelings of like not wanting a character to go, but at the same time, you want her to have the peace that she so desperately wanted this entire time. And she finally gets it. And while it's really sad, I love that she gets to finally be at peace. And I feel like there's something to be said about how Sandy's story is the real horror, like the core of it. Like what one human being would do to another human being or put another human being in, as Jack did to Sandy, is one of the most horrifying concepts, and it exists in real world. Like, this isn't ghosts, this is an actual human being doing a horrible thing to another human being. And I feel like that's why it's so effective for me, because I can actually see that. And I've heard that Sandy's story was all too real for some women in the 60s in London, and that just makes the situation so much more harrowing for me. Anyway, moving on, I wanted to talk about cinematography and camera movements. Like, I've mentioned this throughout the video, but I just found the cinematography to be absolutely incredible. And like I mentioned when talking about the first dance sequence, I thought the camera movements and tracking shots were absolutely incredible. Like, again, that dance sequence was my favorite scene of the entire movie. I literally get goosebumps every time I watch that scene. And honestly, I could talk about every single scene in this movie because every single scene is gorgeous. If it's not neon colors or swirling visuals, it's the set design, it's the setting itself. Also, speaking of set design and setting, like, I found it so impressive that they were on location for almost the entire movie. Edgar really wanted to film in Soho, and all the locations in his script, he really wanted to actually be in the movie, not just a set design, but the actual location. And what's even cooler about it is that Soho doesn't sleep. It's like the only place in London apparently that is 24/7. So I can only imagine how Herculean of a task that was to try to film in an area that doesn't sleep. So I just thought that was so cool. And I also thought it was really creative how they did some certain shots in Soho. Like at the very beginning of the movie, when Ellie first arrives in London, there's this shot right above this winged statue, and we're panning as we're following Ellie's car. And I just thought that was really beautifully well done. Also, the scene after Ellie and John leave the club, they're running through the rain, and we get this really cool shot through a neon sign looking down at the couple. And I just really love how creative they were with not only having the location of Soho, but they got even more creative with it. I just loved that so much. I thought that was so cool. Lastly, the soundtrack is absolutely incredible. Every single song just enhanced the scene even further. It was so incredibly immersive, and it honestly sucked me into the movie right away. It also added to the overall ambiance, not only knowing that Ellie loves the 60s, but also being transported to the 60s. I just thought that was really well done, and Edgar always does a great job with soundtracks, and this was no exception. All right, so those are my thoughts on Last Night in Soho. Like I said, it was my most anticipated movie of 2021. And I just really love how layered the story was, and it was incredibly impactful. And not only that, but the performances and characters were really well done. I loved all the cinematography, camera movements, colors, set designs, as well as the soundtrack. And I just think it's absolutely perfect. It's a modern masterpiece in my opinion. So what did you think about it? Did you have a favorite character or a favorite scene? Also, what was your most anticipated 2021 movie? Let me know in the comments. Also, this is just a reminder that I'm also on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. So if you're interested in following me on those and you haven't already, the links are in my description box below. And as always, make sure to like and subscribe so Black Phillip knows you like to live deliciously. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you again very soon in the next video. Bye!